Welcome back to the Pop Astrologist Presents, your favorite YouTube channel where pop culture and astrology align. I'm your host, Tasha, your pop culture obsessed astrologer, and this week we will be diving into the chart of Donatella Versace on the heels of her departure from Versace. So Donatella announced this last week, March 13th. If you are keeping track of what's happening in the cosmos, we did have a lunar eclipse in Virgo the day after that, March 14th. So this is very much in eclipse territory. But not only that, okay, Mercury officially stationed retrograde on March 15th. Mercury, the ruler of this retrograde, kind of coming to a standstill. And here's the thing, that was not the only astrological event happening right now. We happen to be in a Venus retrograde, which is incredibly significant for Donatella, who happens to be a Venus in Aries. We're going to look at her chart in a second. So, Donatella is stepping away after 30 years at the helm of Versace, at the creative helm. And it's a role that she's taken on since the assassination of her brother. Now, she's been there for 30-ish years, which translates to, about a Saturn return, a whole Saturn cycle. Okay, Saturn takes 29 and a half years to orbit and come back to its natal position. And the Saturn story here is really interesting for Donatella, because as much as this was about her brother's legacy and the family legacy, this iconic brand, building this iconic brand, this was also a meditation on grief. And so we're going to be looking, at our chart through those lens as well, keeping in mind. Now, I don't have any say in terms of, what the future of Versace is going to look like. I did not actually pull up a Versace chart for today's conversation, but for those who might be privy, Versace had been acquired by Michael Kors Holdings slash Capri Holdings, which I guess that's what they go by now, but they were acquired for about $2 billion back in 2018. And so on the one hand, yes, it's a really beautiful moment that she gets to step away, gets to rest, gets to recharge, gets to fuel her new creative vision after really carrying the weight of the family's business for so long. But on the other hand, this should not come as a surprise to people because there seem to have been steps in place over the last 8 years, even in I guess passing this off formally to the next generation. Now, Dario Vitale is coming in from Miu Miu. If you are familiar, Miu Miu is a major fashion luxury brand that has associations with Prada. And Prada is interesting because Capri Holdings is allegedly looking to be shopping Versace around to Prada, who is also, again, interested in maybe purchasing Jimmy Choo, another portfolio company, another luxury brand owned by Capri Holdings. So this is very interesting. It would be obviously very sad to see the Versace family legacy kind of get folded into the Prada emblem, but again, I'm not necessarily here to comment on that. So the plan for today is to talk about Donatella's natal chart, cover some high-level placements, talk about maybe her synastry with Gianni, her composite chart as well, show some very, very interesting stuff. And then talk about, the activation around the announcement, talk about, the tribute collection, why that feels really interesting in the context of a Venus retrograde cycle. Venus was retrograde back in 2017, which is when rumors started coming up that she was going to take a step aside. So, lots to dive into. It is worth noting that Dario will be effectively stepping into his role on April 1st, 2025, which happens to be when Venus and the North Node align. And again, we happen to be amidst a Venus retrograde. We are approaching the Venus Cazimi on March 22nd, 24th is the Mercury Cazimi. So there feels like a natural turning point, a Venus that is looking to be reborn. And remember, Venus has to do so much with fashion. So we will be concluding the episode with some meditations and thoughts on the changing fashion landscape right now. There are chapters, timestamps below for any part that you might be interested in. If you want to jump ahead, go back, and also like, subscribe, follow, share with your friends. It's such a joy to be able to dive into these things with you, and I would love to hear your comments and anything you might observe yourself that I most likely missed. It is Mercury retrograde after all, so please be kind. Okay. So here we have Donatella's chart. It is a very good chart, i.e., it is, I think, at least an A-rated chart, which means we can trust the source. So as we see here, Donatella is a Taurus sun. She is also a Taurus rising and a Virgo moon. So very, very earthy. And when I think about someone with this much earth in the chart, okay, like a very, very strong signature, there is a natural ability to materialize things, to do things, to be productive, to actually create and build, from the ground up. And so it is no surprise to me, okay, that despite a lack of formal training in the fashion world, that she was actually able to, again, translate her vision into reality by virtue of her Earth placement. So again, Taurus sun, Taurus on her ascendant at that. So it's a very loud sun. Remember, any planet on the angle is going to be loud. It is going to have a lot of impact. And so Taurus sun on the ascendant, here I am. This is me. It is loud, it is vibrant. The sun shows where you shine the brightest. And in this case, her Taurus sun in her first, she shines the brightest by being herself. Okay. And the first house, is indicative of identity, of reputation, of physical body, vitality as well, but very much, your vessel, right? How you move about in this world. And so, as such, there is this idea of, is my identity, is my core purpose linked with my identity? Okay. Because the sun can indicate who you're supposed to grow into, where you're supposed to grow into. Well, really an embodied sense of self. Okay, Taurus, embodiment. Taurus rules the body. Taurus also rules fashion. It is one of the fashion signs because Taurus and Libra, the other fashion sign, is ruled by the planet Venus. Okay, so Donatella has Venus in Aries. Pretty significant. We'll get to that in a second because obviously we are in Venus retrograde. Venus just stationed retrograde at 10 degrees Aries. This is literally right on top of this Venus at 9 degrees Aries. Venus stationed on March 1st. So very recently, we are very much in the thick of her retrograde. We are approaching the Venus Cazimi coming up on March 22nd. So later this week, I am recording this on March 17th in the eclipse corridor amidst Mercury retrograde. So God help me get through this recording in one piece. But okay, because we are coming up on Venus's renewal, Venus retrograde, Venus Cazimi amidst her retrograde. This is a shedding. We are still in the shedding phase. Venus is still burning off all her old attachments, all her old sort of values, relationships, because Venus retrogrades are about realigning action, or I should say realigning intention values with your intention and, allowing yourself to um almost give yourself a refresh, whether it's like, oh, I'm choosing to do something different. Oh, I'm looking to pay attention to like what's really lighting my spark, what's really getting me out of bed, what's really motivating me. Okay, Venus and Aries is so much about our innermost desires and what we're hoping for. And so when I think about how her Venus in Aries, okay, is really important as her chart ruler, as a Taurus rising, this is a really, really powerful moment where she is looking to reclaim her identity, maybe let go of some old fears. When I think about Aries in the 12th house, and she's actually got an intercepted Aries, which means maybe she doesn't really have a sense of what do I really want? What do I really want? Right? And so when I think about, again, she is almost like taking a step out of the spotlight. She is coming into this reclusive, 12th house type of energy. So again, 12th house can indicate, a letting go of any type of ego attachments, any kind of old life narrative, because we are about to, I guess, come into the first house again of self. So a Venus in Aries, you would naturally think someone that's bright, that's colorful, that like really, is loud. And it's interesting because on some level that is who she is. She is a confident, dynamic, in your face, like very Hollywood, very, very grandiose, but it did feel like at a certain point there was, a refinement. There was we're moving away from that. I need to show how loud I am to I'm looking to have a more pointed conversation or perspective about my style and what I'm all about and what I'm trying to say. And there's actually a really powerful quote that she had said. I think this was talking about her brother, but the difference between my brother and me is I also love women and think clothes are a good weapon to show here I am, look at me. But for me, it's not look at me, I'm so gorgeous, but look at me, I have something to say. And I think that's really beautiful, because she's got all this Taurus, and Taurus and the throat are, very, very linked. And it's the idea that she is looking to say something with the clothes that she wears. And she's also got Mercury as such in the first house, Mercury in Taurus, someone that is methodical, someone that is pragmatic, someone that can be indulgent. But a Mercury in Taurus, someone that works really hard. Again, it's double emphasis on the loyal. But when I think about Mercury as your filter and how you co-create your reality, right? How she sees the world, that is the lens in which she applies this Venus in Aries. I am looking to be unafraid. I'm not really looking to show off like that. I'm not doing this for other people. I'm doing this because me. I have something I want to say. So it feels like a really beautiful relationship with that Venus and Aries, where it is so much about self-desire. So what's really interesting also about her chart is her Virgo moon. Now, when I think about, again, someone that has a Virgo moon, someone that is precise, someone that can execute, someone that, especially in the fifth house about creativity, there is a meticulousness, there is a precision, but there is an abundance of creativity. And it's almost as if work can be really helpful for her in terms of absolving guilt, absolving some of the grief. It can help her work through her grief. Now, when I also think about the Virgo moon, okay, Mercury rules Virgo. And so Mercury here in her chart is in her first house, again, perception. And fifth house is also very much about children. And so when you think about, Virgo, Mercury, health, I think about how, back in 2007, Donatella had to actually announce or share to the world that her daughter, Allegra, had been battling anorexia. And obviously, Donatella is no stranger to her own substance problems or, addiction and health issues over the course of her long, storied career. What's also worth noting, of course, with this Venus and Aries in the 12th house is she did have to go to rehab. She did have to, kind of isolate herself. But nevertheless, she's still, one of the only women at the top of a major fashion house, or I guess was at the top of a major fashion house. She was a tour de force. And when I think about how, Mars also is in conversation with that Venus in Aries, Mars ruling that Venus in Aries, Gemini in her second house, Gemini and siblings. That theme is so incredibly loud. And when I think about Mars, Mars is an agent. It's an active agent. It's an inspiring agent. It can be motivating. And when I think about the idea of sibling motivating, right? This notion of, I am inspired by my sibling. Donatella was Gianni's muse and then eventually turned into, the person who controlled the company or who was at the helm of creative decisions for the company. And so there's an interesting duality with the Mars here, right? Also, if you think about it, as if there was the switch that happened after there was the loss, 12th house, house of loss of her sibling, Mercury ruling, or excuse me, Mars ruling that Venus in Aries, shaking her confidence. Okay, it's a whole financial situation. What do we do here? And then Mercury also, okay, having resonance because Mercury rules Gemini, Mercury ruling that Mars in Gemini from her first house sibling as the filter. So she can either have her own filter or she could be wearing Gianni's filter. And so when I think about after the assassination, how the roles then switch, where she no longer was the muse. She was in fact the active agent, and Gianni effectively became the, inspiration. I think is really powerful symbolism in the chart itself. Now, Mars doesn't only rule, well, it's an intercepted 12th house, of course, but Mars happens to rule Donatella's seventh house as well of one-on-one relationships, and it is a seventh house in Scorpio. Not only that, she has a Saturn in Scorpio here, and she's got Juno, in Scorpio on her descendant. And so, on some level, there is a meaningful soul contract here. Okay. And when I think about Saturn in Scorpio in the seventh, sort of like I think about the grief, and I think about how she spent 30 years trying to uphold and build this legacy, continue what he started. I think about that Saturn in Scorpio. Her Saturn story has to do with these one-on-one relationships, this social contract that she had with her sibling as part of this loss. And so, when you think about, oh, okay, Scorpio can kind of invite maybe, the darker side of reality, right? You think about the shadow side of life. It makes sense that this can symbolize a potential devastation or a tragedy around someone that she loved, someone that she was very close to, but someone who maybe, was trying to teach her how to cultivate her own power. Because when you have planets in the seventh house, they don't necessarily belong to you. They can belong to the other person. It's the axis of the other. And so, on some level, by virtue of Gianni actually I guess, getting assassinated, he indirectly stepped aside, allowed her to reclaim some of her power, some of her perspective, her power and belief in her voice, in her creative perspective. Because, in the first few years of her taking over, the first collection that she took over, or I guess debuted in 2000 or 1998, was appreciated by a lot of folks, but everything after that kind of got panned until literally, 2004, they were starting to like bleed money. 2009, I mean, this era of Pluto moving into Capricorn was really rough for the Versace family and the Versace brand. But other things really worth noting about Donatella's chart is also, I mean, look at this Cancer energy in her fourth house. I mean, on her IC, Jupiter is literally on her IC. If you want to talk about literal family symbolism, family playing a huge part of her narrative in this lifetime, this is her Jupiter in Cancer on her IC. Jupiter also ruling her eighth house of joint ventures, of death, of transformation, of shadow work, of grief. It's a really powerful relationship here. But not only that, it is a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which means it is big, loud, breakthrough, genius, almost like, everything everywhere all at once. And it's really interesting because we actually had a, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction this past May 2024. Jupiter Uranus met up in Taurus in that early 23 and like I think 23 degrees of Taurus. So activating her Mercury. So there was a natural resonance with the chart. Now remember, if there is a signature, an aspect signature in your natal chart, and if that same aspect signature is playing out in the cosmos, there's going to be a significant moment for you or a significant materialization of stuff happening. Worth noting also, J-Lo. She happens to have a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Libra, so it would make sense that both Donatella and her ganged up for that literal viral groundbreaking. I mean, this picture literally broke the internet. They had to create Google image searches because, and you know the dress I'm talking about, okay? The one that J-Lo wore to the Grammys. I think she was a Diddy, which we're not going to talk about here. But low cut, plunge, jungle, green dress, okay? It's hard to forget. But this is also really interesting because when I think about a Jupiter in Cancer Uranus, this is you know, it would have been a really difficult decision for her to want to step away because family is everything. And this is one of the only, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, luxury fashion houses that is still in the family in such a way, you know? And so to take this big step away is an end of an era. Okay. Um, that sounded very flippant, but it is an end of an era. I'm saying this seriously. So, as an evolutionary astrologer, the nodes obviously play a really important part. And so, when I think about, okay, she's got a south node in Gemini in her second house, and she's got a north node in Sag in her eighth house, there was a sense of maybe taking, her perspective, taking the siblings' perspective, but really leaning into a vision and bringing that forth. And so they have to collaborate in order to help each other with their purpose in this lifetime. Um, you can maybe see a situation where maybe they were, Mars and Gemini, right? Like your ego or your grief or something got in the way of you actually being able to actualize this vision from within. Jupiter in Cancer is a powerful dream weaver. Cancer is a very powerful dream weaver energy, but Jupiter is exalted in Cancer in traditional astrology, and so it is well resourced there. It's incredibly, again, powerful. If you want to talk about the two most creative signs, I would argue they would be the sun, I mean, Leo and Cancer. Leo, just the more external version, but Cancer very much ruling the internal domain. And it's the idea that if we were to think about a Saturn return, the progressed lunar return, which happens at 27, is really yielded by the moon that then dictates the reality and how we choose to build. And so, a Jupiter in Cancer in the fourth house is a really powerful manifester, but also someone that has deep, deep roots with the family. And so, I can see a situation where early on, like she's got all this creative genius in her, but maybe feeling that insecurity. This is not her lane, this is her brother's lane. And you can kind of see that too a little bit, right? When you think about her Virgo moon ruling that Jupiter Uranus, like she's got all these really crazy, beautiful ideas, but then like she might run into paralysis analysis on what to do with it again back then. And while she was trying to find footing and figure out her identity, I can imagine that there was a what was the right decision? Is there a wrong decision? Is there a right decision? And, in true Sagittarius form, right? She was here to learn there was no wrong decision. Everything was a step, a lesson as part of the plan. And as long as she was still able to take a step closer or take a step closer to her vision, her inner dream. And quite honestly, she was probably most likely getting a lot of help from Gianni as well, metaphysically speaking. So this might be actually a really interesting time to bring up Gianni's chart as well. Okay, so this is Gianni's chart. I'm just showing it here just so folks have it as reference. He's a Sagittarius sun. Now we remember just talked about the Sagittarius energy. He's also a Scorpio rising, unsurprising considering the series of events, and he's also a Pisces moon. So he was a dreamer, he was a visionary, he was a really powerful alchemist, had an ability to really create some divine loud. Okay, he's got Mars in Sag in the first house. Now what is really interesting about Gianni's chart, right, if you look, he's got the south node in Sag and the north node in Gemini. They have opposing nodes, Gianni and um Donatella, but in Gianni's chart, he's asked to move away from just himself, right? The South Node in the first house. He's also got Jupiter, and so like total control. And he's asked to collaborate, asked to have a relationship, asked to, it's the idea of what can you give up control over, and you can create a bigger sum of the parts, or the sum of the parts creating a bigger whole together. So very interesting, especially because he's got Venus and Mercury ruling the seventh house. Sorry, Venus ruling the seventh house. It's also conjunct Mercury. Um, What's really interesting here too is he's got a Venus retrograde in Scorpio, and we happen to be in again a Venus retrograde. So very significant time for Gianni as well, posthumously. Okay. Now when what's really coming to mind when I look at this 12th house emphasis here is the fact that The 12th house again is very metaphysical. It's between worlds, between realms. And so the idea of having a sibling connection in between realms is very interesting. But also, when you think about again, he was murdered or assassinated by a secret enemy, Andrew Cunanan. Cunanan? I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but I know Darren Criss played him in the Ryan Murphy American True Crime series. But you can also see where that might be a factor. So, looking at Donatella and his chart together, let me actually just switch them. Okay, you can kind of see, boom, this nodal activation is kind of insane. You have, okay, Donatella's Mars is in the inside, the inner ring, and you have Gianni's chart in the outer ring. Mars, her body, her physical, literal body, her mind, her ambition, her perspective on his North Node, helping bring his vision to life, helping bring his perspective to reality. Whew, that is some really powerful symbolism. And again, it's the idea that I see all of this Scorpio synastry as well. Okay. That Venus, that Mercury we're talking about, even Jupiter, okay, that is all on Donatella's Saturn. And so I actually was doing some research earlier and I found this to be quite striking. So I always have my Dane Rudyard mandala with me. Sabian symbols, are really interesting to bake into your interpretations as well. It gives you more color. And Sabian symbols really are, I would say, psychic downloads around what each degree could represent. And this one happens to be, a mandala about Dane Rudyard's interpretations. There are others as well that you might be interested in. So just, check those out, give them a whirl, see what comes up in your interpretations. But this is really interesting. Okay. So I'm looking at Donatella's Saturn in Scorpio at 18 degrees. Because again, remember, this is a Saturnian story. This is a 30-year Saturn cycle that she is now stepping away. So we are going to look at Saturn a little more scrutinizingly. And so for an 18-degree Scorpio, you are going to be looking at that, the degree up. So we're going to look at that 19 degrees. Okay. A parrot repeats the conversation he has overheard. The capacity to transmit transcendental knowledge, channelship. So there's a lot. So this is really interesting. And then if I look at Scorpio 17 degrees for his Venus, for Gianni's Venus, okay? Because that's like a literal conjunction here of like soulmate energy, of lifetimes, of many karmic lifetimes, Saturn karma, time, Saturn rules karma and time, and Venus long, relationships, and Scorpio fixed sign. This is like through the depths of hell type of energy, okay? It's very, I mean, I hate to use the phrase twin flame, but if there was ever a moment for it, I guess this would probably be it. So, that being said, if you're looking for Scorpio at 18 degrees, we get a path through woods brilliant with multicolored splendor, the exalted feeling of a work well done and a truly consummated life. There is a sense of transfiguration. It's interesting. The note around this also says the person who has lived with faith the transpersonal life, the life through which spirit radiates creatively, can experience blessedness and peace even though his or her cycle of experience nears its end. So it's interesting. On some level, reading that description makes me think that there was a baking in around maybe an early end around Gianni. And I'm not saying if you have that degree, like that means you're cooked, but early on. But it just feels interesting that, if I think about like a multicolored forest, like he was very loud, he was very bright, everything was incredibly like flamboyant and passionate and very, fiery, very Mars and Sag, right? And so to see that interplay between who he was and then this idea of channelship, him channeling, she's channeling him through, her ideas, collaborating in the metaphysical to bring about this reality, this co-creative reality. Remember, she's got Mercury in Taurus. really close. I mean, it's not, a 10-degree orb, but it's nevertheless there, kind of under the sun's rays. So she might not necessarily trust her own opinion, but it's the idea that her brother can kind of give her some structure to help her trust her own voice so that she can really create the containers needed to then bloom into the excellence and the legacy that we now see today. Um, so I just found that really, really fascinating. And of course, like I don't even know like where to begin with this, but they also have this Uranus square moon relationship, meaning, he might have been someone that galvanized her, someone that allowed her to push herself out of her comfort zone. He was the one that actually, again, invited her to come work with him for him when she was still studying in school. Like he was at the mom's dress shop and she wasn't, I think, either allowed to or wasn't necessarily favored by her mom to do fashion in the same way. But Gianni was really a big supporter of her. So he got her to join him. This Uranus square moon makes a lot of sense. I assume it can be irritating as well. But speaking of Sabian symbols, I did miss this earlier. Another Sabian symbol that I thought was really striking is Mars in Gemini at 14 degrees. So I'm reading from Gemini 15 degrees as such. Two Dutch children talking to each other, exchanging their knowledge. The need to clarify one's experiences through actual context with like-minded individuals. So again, you kind of, get this imagery, right, of Gianni and Donatella, both siblings that had a really, really tight bond. There is an eldest sibling, Santo, I believe is his name. But he's not really part of this. He's part of the ownership, but he's not really a part of this Mars Gemini type of energy. In fact, when I think again about the bond that they had, this speaks incredibly loudly. Um, what's also worth noting, of course, Gianni's natal Saturn, this is again a very Saturn story. Saturn does oppose her Chiron in Aquarius, in her 10th house of legacy, of purpose. The Saturn and Chiron can be quite painful. It's kind of maybe this wound around not there's like no recognition. And I think this was something she had to battle before, the idea that she wanted to make sure there was space for her ideas to shine. Um, this is actually a quote from her. It was very difficult for me when I took over, she says. It was easy to go and do what Gianni had done until then and risk nothing because it was the Versace style, but I couldn't do it forever. Not as far as my own creativity was concerned. And so, when I think about Saturn and Chiron oppositions, right, I think about like wounding, I think about not necessarily like maybe feeling good enough, no acknowledgement, especially Saturn and Leo, Chiron. And he was kind of like maybe this guy that, this elder figure for her that saw her, that made her feel accepted, that made her feel like she could belong in the family in that way. And so, when I think also about Donatella's Mercury Saturn opposition here and how, he's got all of this Scorpio here to help break that Mercury Saturn self-inadequacy. I think that's a really powerful thing. But then you can also see where it might be overpowering to the point where she just loses her creative authority. And so I think, on some level, the journey that she's gone through does mirror her own attempt at self-ownership, but also honoring her brother and really making something of her own identity. Because remember, the first house is still really important. She has to actualize and feel embodied in order to really bring the vision to life together. Now, what I found um, really striking was also their composite chart. So here we have the charts together. This is using the midpoint method. But I mean, just look at this, right? This chart together has an Aquarius sun, Aquarius rising, and a Sagittarius moon, Chiron on the moon. Okay, but look at the Aquarius sun. This is an Aquarius sun that literally opposes Mercury and Pluto in the seventh house, the house of open enemies and others. And social contracts, one-on-one relationships. And so, when I think about Mercury, sibling, Mercury also can rule the gun, Pluto, tragedy, death, that opposing this team. Okay. This may be breaking the team in the physical plane, but not breaking the team in the metaphysical plane. You think about their South Node in Virgo in that eighth house, asking to move away, asking to kind of allow themselves to prove self to themselves, turn something in from tragedy, alchemize tragedy into something beautiful. The idea that, there was a lot of service baked into this South Node and Virgo for both of them, that they were both going to have to play their roles in order to really actualize. And so it's interesting, Mars is also on the North Node here, almost like Mars, the activating agent. It could have either really the grief, so, in the aftermath of the assassination could have really felt overwhelming, almost like, let me just stay here, why bother and try to do anything. But the idea that Mars, a spiritual type of galvanization, was helpful at maybe, not all the time, because again, she did battle her demons throughout in a very public manner, but it also gave her the confidence and the ability to really prove self to self, go after it, really, create something of significance for this family. And so, I think it's like a really beautiful chart. And mind you, I said that, Donatella recently announced this on March 13th, the day before the lunar eclipse in Virgo. Well, that was a lunar eclipse in Virgo at 23 degrees. So if I were to pull up the transit chart and maybe bring this back a few days, boop, 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 boop. See the eclipse and Saturn and the sun coming together right on the nodal axis of Donatella and Gianni's composite chart. This was a moment where the dreams already maybe taken its, as far as we can go together, and what a success this was. But ultimately, maybe it was time to finally let go and finally move on and pursue a different creative vision, one that speaks to an expansion, especially with the Jupiter. I mean, I think it's really powerful. And then also, check this out. Okay, Pluto is on their Ceres, and Ceres describes your rhythms of mothering. It is your nurturing. It is how you developed. Pluto transforming that idea, and maybe on some level, this is an opportunity for her to really finish or at least get into a different layer of closure and healing around this relationship. And, on some level, I'm a little nervous because if your whole life work is your identity, this brand is your identity as part of, your brother's identity, who are you now that this no longer exists? Even though you are the chief brand officer, like this is a really, to me, it could be a really scary moment of Venus and Aries. I don't really know what's coming after the cliff, but I know that I have maybe done what I needed to do. And Pluto's been going over that Venus in Capricorn, right? That late degree Venus in Capricorn over the last few years. And so this has been probably a really, really, really difficult time at deciding, like, do I let go of this legacy of this duty? Can I actually step away? But also, Venus in Capricorn is telling me institutional powers, secret enemies in the 12th house, and the battle that she's had to navigate with, I forget his name now, the guy who owns Capri Holdings, John Idol, maybe. But, it makes sense, right? Like, it's a family Italian brand, and an American cowboy West is coming in trying to, like, do things differently. Um, so what's interesting, so I pulled up the chart for like the day of the announcement. The time's not accurate, but you can kind of see, all right, already in the chart. Oh, let me switch this to a whole sign chart just for transit activation. Chart. So a lot of things, right? You can see Venus still stationing, Mercury about to station on that Venus, okay, before it goes retrograde. You've also got Pluto as a Taurus rising. Pluto just entered her 10th house of career, of public reputation, of legacy. And so you kind of see the natural transformation. So if you're a Taurus rising, you're most likely going to be experiencing some similar type of shift where, it is not just like I want to change my job. It's like this is a career defining moment. And so Pluto also is applying to her Chiron, where there is so much of this wounding, right? Saturn ruling that Chiron, this grief. We're still touching on this grief, we're meditating on this grief, but maybe it's a moment where she maybe has alchemized more grief than she's even given herself credit for. And now she can actually allow there for space to, her voice to fill up this creative space so that she can actually like, what do I really want to do with my time now that my life isn't my family's brand and this company? So other things that are really worth noting in the chart, Uranus, this planet of individuation, rebellion. I'm here to march to the beat of my own drum. Uranus isn't really here to play by anyone else's rules. It is here to play to your soul's authenticity and what it really needs. And sometimes it can feel really selfish. Sometimes it can feel really like, oh my God, that just came out of nowhere. But that's kind of how Uranus rocks and rolls, okay? And so Uranus has been in Taurus since 2017, 2018. So it is interesting because the tribute collection, that supermodel collection where she again brought everyone back out, she brought J.Lo back out, okay, all these dresses that we all come to love over years. That was happening amidst 2017, where we had a Venus retrograde early in the year. Okay, that was also a year there were a lot of rumors that she was possibly going to step aside. Kim Jones would have been an interesting choice at the time, Virgil as well. These were some of the names and the rumblings and the rumors and the nastiness. But I think about how then Uranus going through at that point already laid the groundwork for her ultimately departing. But if you think about Taurus, again, fixed AF, it's never going to want to let go. And so it almost feels like you need to kind of bust in like a wrecking ball, kind of break this long-standing narrative. And so Uranus on her Mercury as well. And Uranus just recently stationed direct, like at the end of Jan, which was, I think, right after she just finished her show as well. So the idea of there's this like massive awakening happening on Mercury. Again, Mercury rules her second house of resources. Mercury also, rules her fifth house of creativity, a self-expression. Second house is also confidence and your voice. Now, also interesting, Jupiter happens to be on that on that Mars, and Jupiter and Mars, I really want to have more of my say, more of my perspective. But in an interview with, Luisa Zargani, who is the Milan bureau chief for Women's Wear Daily, she said that Donatella had probably stepped back because she knows a moment of creative upheaval is coming for the brand. So when I look at that Jupiter and Mars conjunction here or activation, I think of Mars as a severance and I think of Jupiter as like money. And Jupiter in Gemini, I think about maybe like foreign money. The Americans, right, coming in, there's the clash around perspective, but also a bigger need for her voice to be heard, but also kind of, seeing almost like the writing on the wall, okay, around her time here. How much can she really carry on? Especially because she's also got this Mars-Jupiter activation here. So there's a lot of Mars-Jupiter. There's a lot about how much do you really want this? How much do you want to fight for this? How much willpower, how much strength do you have? How much fight you got left in you, And when I think about Mars on Jupiter here, like, whew, this severing of a long-standing family type of business, Jupiter Cancer, third house, it's coming in from the third house, siblings, like it is so layered here. And again, Jupiter Cancer exalted, right? So, it's the idea that it's being met really belovedly, like people are showing her tribute post. This is effectively a tribute Astro conversation. But amidst some of the drama and the rumors, right, that she's getting ousted, she's being shown a lot of love and a lot of respect and a lot of, being treated with a lot of care, at least by the media. So I guess you can kind of see that third house social media as well. And in Cancer, it's about the feminine. So there's a lot of feminine perspectives coming out. You've got Dua Lipa, you've got Jennifer Lopez, you've got, I'm sure, the Kardashians. Beyond, like, everyone's kind of coming out and posting their own version of a tribute to Donatella, Mary Cosby on Salt Lake City. LOL. You should go check out that post because it's very Mary Cosby-esque. So recently I had the privilege of attending an in-person workshop with none other than Lynn Bell, who, if you haven't heard of her book, Cycles of Light. It is an excellent book on solar returns if you are interested in the technique. Now, I was interested in, I was curious around what Donatella's solar return had to say around her stepping down. And, I pulled up the chart for her birthday. Yeah, so this is her solar return. It doesn't have to be the same date. So I do know that date says April 30th. Okay. But if you look at here, I mean, this is so crazy, right? Her south node, the south node in the 10th house, and this is a solar return chart that is so underneath the hemisphere. So it feels very personal, feels very private, feels very introspective, feels very like coming home. The idea that we're asking to come out of the spotlight and focus and hone in on the self, the true self, come to home, come back to family, feels really interesting, right? And if you think about this Moon Pluto situation in her second house of money, of her voice, there is a transformation around how she makes her income. Again, because she is still a global ambassador, meaning like she's still involved, but she's not, going to be making money like that. She also happens to have the Jupiter-Uranus signature in her solar return. And remember, she had a Jupiter-Uranus signature in her natal chart, Cancer, right? And so again, you would see there's some resonance in the fifth house of creativity. So, when I think about there is a rebuilding of a new perspective, third house, a dissolving and a rebuilding of a new perspective, but one that, is going to make sure you kind of come back to yourself, trust how your body's saying, an opportunity to like show yourself a lot of self-love, right? Venus in Taurus, like treat yourself, girl, you deserve all this rest. You deserve to put your, foot on the table. You deserve a break. It's been a long run. And so I thought it was really profound that just on the solar return chart alone, you kind of see there being this natural step away from the public transformation around her career livelihood, but also a need to get a different kind of creative perspective out there. Now, if I were to layer in her actual birthday chart, okay, um, which you would do to get more information potentially, or to see where some themes might resonate even more. Look at this Chiron activation with the moon and Pluto. It's very close, but it's, to me, when I think about where Chiron is in her chart natally, 10th house, legacy, again, Saturn, that sibling connection. Also, right, when you think about the Saturn Neptune here, like a dissolving of the sibling dream, but rebuilding it into something different. Now there is a different channel for this. So and I mean, look at that. Hello, Donatella's midheaven is 23 degrees Capricorn. She's also got her solar return series. So again, this idea of there is a returning to this mountain. What mountain are you climbing? Whose mountain are you climbing? Are you climbing your mountain or are you climbing someone else's mountain? And it's not to say it was wrong climbing another person's mountain, but now that you've climbed that mountain, what would you like to do? And so I think, as much as this might be a really interesting moment for the Versace family, um, and admittedly a sad one when you think about the idea of a family business kind of going away, legacy never dies. There is the impact of their clothes and their designs, their fashion, their moments. Like again, Google Images was created single-handedly so that people could actually get a glimpse of the Jennifer Lopez green Versace dress. Now, in terms of fashion, okay, there has been a lot of craziness. Over this weekend, we finally also got confirmation that Jonathan Anderson is leaving Loewe after 11 years of creative directing. And, that's admittedly something we've heard. Rumors started to appear earlier this Jan. But I think it's really fascinating that there is a massive clearing of house well, amongst the fashion houses. And when I think about a house, I think about literally Mars and Cancer. This idea that we are in a Mars and Cancer retrograde narrative, retrograde, December 6th through Feb 23rd. So there was maybe a lot of standstill. There was a lot of, we don't really know what we're doing. And then the moment Mars station direct, the moment, March really started to kick in, there was clarity, there was an understanding, there was a winding down of an old attachment of old jobs, of old responsibilities. So it's why you saw Donatella's announcement come. It's why you see Jonathan's announcement come. There's a lot, that is changing form. It's as if fashion is going through its own cultural reset, a regime change that is mirroring what is happening in the world order. Remember, we are experiencing a ton of Aries energy. We are literally about to walk into the spring equinox March 20th, and it's the idea that the new year, the astrological new year formally begins, and this is very much in the lead up to it, a time of letting things go, winding things down. It is concluding. So it is interesting when you think about, all right, we're at the beginning of Pluto in Aquarius. Okay, we're in this new era. Now, what are we actually going to do about it? Now, how can we kind of create this new structure to build on for the next 20-year run? So, Aries as the initiator, right? There's a lot happening here. Neptune will also be moving into Aries at the end of the month, literally this month. If you think about Aries, right, it is literally the opposite sign of Libra, and Libra is one of the signs, as I mentioned earlier, that has to do with fashion. And so here we have a resurgence of creativity. There is a melting or sort of an alchemization process that's happening. And so okay, we get out of the fire, there is some life, there is new vitality. So things can feel fresh, things can feel born again. But in order to make room for that, some things have to be let go, put aside, wound down. And so well, it's really sad to see the potential for Versace to, be, I guess, folded into Prada. Nevertheless, I don't think anyone's going to forget the legacy that Donatella has really carved for herself. It is a true story of resilience. It is a true story of loyalty, family love, but also undying confidence, or at least faith in your ability to bring visions to reality. And so, thank you, Donatella, for showing us what a beautiful, confident woman could feel like, could embody. And we really appreciate everything that you've done. And we look forward to see what you have up your sleeve next. So, if you enjoyed this solo episode, please like, subscribe, share. I'll be back next week with a special guest to talk about more astrology, more pop culture. God knows it's eclipse retrograde season, so the headlines are just gonna keep rolling in. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back soon.